Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters, to the spiritual exercises. Today, we're going to have a very easy day because it's the end, really, of the first week, and it's good to have a little break. However, I'm going just to make a few points that I think will be necessary. If you finish your examination of conscience, maybe you are ready to go to confession. And I want to make some observations regarding sin. How do we determine if a sin is mortal or if a sin is venial? A mortal sin, the effects of mortal sins are awful. A mortal sin deserves that we go to hell because of it. Just one mortal sin is enough to send us to hell. And a mortal sin has three elements. The first element is that it has to be a serious matter, and it has to be done with full knowledge that it is a sin, and also with full consent of the will. And a sin is venial, and venial sins, they do not kill the life of God in us, and they do not cut us off from God, and they are not deserving of hell, but they certainly deserving of some temporal punishment. But a venial sin is either lacks gravity in the matter, or the person did it without full knowledge that it was a sin and without full consent of the will. That is, this person neither knew, or he had maybe ignorance, or he didn't really participate wholeheartedly in the sin, or he was forced into it, or whatever, for whatever matter. Now, how do we know if a matter is grave in the actions that we commit? Well, first of all, we can take the Ten Commandments. If something is against the Ten Commandments, we can know that it has some gravity to it. When we refer to the first three commandments, which are regarding our relationship with God, I believe that all the sins against the first three commandments are grave. That is why one of the most common mortal sins is failing to go to Mass on Sunday without a just cause. For example, a just cause could be if the person is ill and they are unable to get out of the house, or if they are taking care of an ill person and they cannot leave the person alone. It is not enough that I have a little, let's say, a little illness, like my toe is hurting, or I have a little discomfort in my stomach, for example, but it doesn't prevent me from doing other things. I cannot take it as an excuse not to go to Mass. And this happens quite a bit because people say, oh, I didn't go to Mass because I was sick, but then you see them out there in the mall or out there in the park, and for that they don't feel sick. But when it comes to going to Mass, all of a sudden they feel that their illness is an impediment for them to go to Mass. And that's a very curious attitude of us as human beings. We like to find excuses for the things that maybe we don't find pleasurable. And we find that all of a sudden we are healed when something that we really want to do comes our way, and we no longer think about our discomfort. So that is in regards to the first three commandments. And there are many other sins that we could commit against God. And of course, all these sins are grave matter because of the person that we are offending by our actions, or by failing to give God his due as God, which is our obedience and also our worship. Now, in all the other commandments, there are different degrees of gravity. For example, killing is of course, killing directly a person is evil. There are some cases in which killing is not a sin. For example, in the case of self-defense, or in the case of one person defending their country in a just war. So there are occasions when killing is not a mortal sin, but generally speaking, when you kill a person, when you deprive them of their life in a way that is unjust, then of course it's a grave matter. And of course, the worst kind of offense against the commandment of not killing is killing a person who is utterly defenseless and utterly weak, defenseless, and that they cannot defend themselves, and that they defenseless and they cannot defend themselves. Well, I'm referring to the unborn people who are very small, who cannot speak for themselves, who cannot defend themselves. They are innocent, and they are the victims of one of the most heinous crimes in our time, which is abortion. But so that they are also other offenses against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, which might not be as grave a matter, for example, smoking or maybe drinking a little too much. Of course, it damages the health of the person, but is not per se, smoking a cigar is not a mortal sin, and drinking a beer is not a mortal sin. So there are different degrees of gravity. And in regards to the sixth commandment about purity, all the sins against purity are grave matter. And so that can give us an idea of how to differentiate if a sin is mortal or if a sin is venial. Venial, if I lack either full consent or full knowledge, or if the matter is not grave. Another thing that I want to mention about forgiveness of sin is about perfect contrition and imperfect contrition. Perfect contrition is a grace, is something that the Lord gives us if we seek and we ask for it, and we desire this grace, and is to be sorry, to have a true pain, true sorrow for our sins, not because of the damage that it does to us or the pain that it bears, which is the pain of hell or the pain of temporal punishment, but because we offended God. In that case, when we reach that grace of perfect contrition, when I am sorry because I offended God, who is so good and who has been so generous and gracious to me, and I feel sorry and I feel sorrow for my sins, that I have offended such a good God, that is perfect contrition. And imperfect contrition is when I am sorry for my sins because they deserve that I go to hell. They have deserved for me hell. And that is a good reason to be repentant of our sins and to ask forgiveness from God, because I don't want to go to hell. That is very, very good reason. But that is what we call imperfect contrition. And what are the effects? The effects of perfect contrition is that, first of all, when I go to confession, confess my sins with a perfect contrition, then the sin is forgiven, and not only the sin, but also the temporal punishment due to those sins. If it is imperfect, if my contrition is imperfect, if I go to confession because I don't want to go to hell, I want to confess my sins and receive forgiveness from God, which is again an excellent reason to go to confession. But if my contrition is imperfect and is in a sense selfish, then I receive from God the forgiveness of the eternal punishment. That is, I will not go to hell because of that sin if I confess it, even with imperfect contrition, but I still need to satisfy the temporal punishment due to those sins. And the temporal punishment, how do we understand that? Is that sin has several consequences. The most heinous consequence is that if it is a mortal sin, that I will go to hell. That's the most awful consequence of sin. The other consequence of sin is what is called temporal punishment, and it means that when I commit a sin, I deserve to suffer because of it. And that is the temporal punishment. And that temporal punishment can be paid out in this life. And if there is things that I haven't suffered for, things that I did that I have not satisfied for those sins, then I will suffer after death in purgatory. But if I die in the state of grace and I go to purgatory, I will just suffer death there as long as I satisfy for the sins that I have not fully repented, or have repented, but not with perfect contrition. And so you can understand that suffering is a consequence of sin in many cases. I don't want to say that people who are suffering is because they have committed many sins. No, of course, there is also the case of innocent suffering. But in general, our sins produce suffering in the world, either for ourselves, but also for those who are the victims of our sin. And they suffer sometimes innocently, but it's a consequence of sin. And for that suffering that I cause, I need to make amends, whether willingly or unwillingly, and in this life or in the life to come, especially if I die in the state of grace, but I have not fully repented with a perfect contrition of all my sins, of my mortal sins. And so that is a little explanation about the the gravity of sin, about perfect contrition, imperfect contrition. And also another thing to notice is that since you are doing the spiritual exercises, when you complete these spiritual exercises, you can do the works for a plenary indulgence. It has the merit of the, so to speak, the price that if you complete the spiritual exercises, you will receive a plenary indulgence if you fulfill the typical conditions. That is, at the end of the exercises or during the exercises, you go to confession, and also you go to communion, and you pray for the Holy Father's intentions, and that will give you a plenary indulgence. The advantage of doing the exercises is that the condition to receive a plenary indulgence, which is most of the time lacking in people, to receive a plenary indulgence, is the detachment from sin. And these spiritual exercises in several points during these meditations and these coming weeks as well, we are invited to detach from those things that separate us from God. In other words, they are very effective in detaching us from sin, and therefore they help us to have the best disposition to receive a plenary indulgence. So just to summarize, today, I would like you to, if you want to still have a whole hour of meditation or prayer, just simply prepare for a good confession. Go over the notes that you have in the past, perhaps. And if you think that you want to repeat any of the previous meditations, please go ahead and do it. And just follow whatever your heart desires. And if you feel that you really need a break, by all means, do take a break, but make sure that you receive absolution, and if you are able to, and have a good confession, receive absolution, and prepare to begin tomorrow with the second week of the spiritual exercises. Well, thank you very much. That is all for today, and may God bless you and keep you. And as always, please do pray for me, even as I pray for you every day. God bless you. Bye.